Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome back to my Predator series re-review stuff. Where today, me and good old Trevor boy
Howdy, everybody.
will be discussing one of my favorite installments in the entire franchise, with 1990s, extremely miserably underrated, Predator 2. I hate this disc. Why do they have to put the title sideways on the disc?
That's an interesting question. That's the Blu-ray, right?
No, it's just DVD.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't think mine's like that. I'll have to look.
So, yes, indeed, miserably underrated in my opinion, and still one of my favorite installments.
Yeah, when it comes to Alien and Predator, really the top of the pyramid are the first two movies for each. But that doesn't mean that you should ignore some of the later ones.
Not at all. Okay, I'm going to take this off now. So, Trev, what might be your history with the overall Predator franchise?
Yeah, okay, so this should be fun. My earliest memory of Predator was whenever my dad was. What's the Burt fuel today?
Diet Sam's Cola.
There we go. Anyway, as I was saying, my earliest memory of Predator and Aliens, for that matter, was my dad watching two VHSs, the first editions of the VHS that came out way back in the day. And I just remember certain things kind of sticking out to me and kind of creeping me out. For Predator, because I'm sure we're probably going to talk about the Alien movies down the road, at least some of them. Yeah, what I remembered most from the original Predator was the Predator vision scenes. I didn't understand what was going on, and it kind of freaked me out. I was like, why did the scene change? Why does it look like this? So that kind of intrigued me for years and years, and then I realized, oh, that's the perspective of the monster, which was the Predator. And I started really getting into both Alien and Predator, not the movies, because I was kind of kept away from those as long as possible, mainly my mom's influence. My main exposure to it was there's a monster model kit site called Monsters in Motion, and they had a lot of really neat collectibles on there that caught my eye. I was like, oh, so this is what a Predator is. This is what an alien is, or a xenomorph. And I was just like, I need to see these movies someday, and I eventually did.
Sure, by your mom's chagrin.
Yeah. Well, just to give an example of how my mom actually really doesn't get these movies, and not to knock her, this is actually a funny story. She thought the reason the Predators had dreadlocks was because of this movie, because of the Jamaicans. I was like, no, Mom. The Predator in the first movie had dreadlocks too, and there wasn't any Jamaicans, so. Yeah, she also labeled one of the tapes for the Alien movies Aliens 3 instead of just Alien 3 because she thought Aliens was the first movie. So, yeah, nothing to knock her, but she's clearly not a fan. But anyway, so yeah, I did eventually actually watch the original Predator and loved it, of course.
Duh.
Predator 2, on the other hand, was a more interesting process to getting to watch it. My dad actually had recorded it, plus the making of too, so it would have been a real neat vintage thing to watch had I not recorded over it when I was a kid, not realizing that I would want to watch it someday. I recorded an episode of Zaboomafoo, of all things, over it. So, yeah. And of course my dad was a little crabby about that, although he later admitted that he's not really a fan of Predator 2. He's mainly a fan of the first movie and Predators. He likes the whole jungle soldier aesthetic when it comes to Predator. He doesn't really care.
Was your dad in the military?
Stuff or anything. He was in the Air Force.
Probably explains it.
So yeah, that might have something to do with it. But he also likes the first AVP. He doesn't like the second, so on, so on.
I mean, that's a much easier.
Oh yeah, well,
accepting process.
Requiem's an acquired taste. We'll just say that.
Yeah, tune in Friday for that, for me and Trev's thoughts on that movie.
All right, good deal. Yeah, I've been watching that a lot lately for some reason, but we'll get into it. Um, yeah, so I finally did see Predator 2, but it was on TV because it used to be on FX a whole lot, especially whenever AVP was brand new. I think they used to show the first Predator and Predator 2 on FX, AMC, on cable a whole lot back in the day. Sadly, that's been a long time since they've done that, but it's not really fresh anymore. It would be considered. It was also on. I said AMC already, so yeah, you would probably see it on AMC still, maybe. But yeah, so I remember watching Predator 2 on FX, and they do edit the movies obviously because they're on network TV. I just remember the pacing kind of throwing me off, mainly because I think they edited some bits out that made it flow better. So I remember thinking, this just doesn't flow like the first movie does. So it kind of influenced my opinion for the longest time. And then I finally got the DVD, along with the DVDs for like the AVP movies, the first one, the first 4 Aliens. And I just remember going through all of them and, appreciating them in their uncut form and their special editions for like the Alien movies. And then finally Predator 2 just jived with me because I saw it in full. It is a very differently paced and styled movie from the first one. But yes. I think that works to its benefit because it is unique among all the entries now. So yeah, I finally watched it in full, and it really jived with me. And I realized this really there hasn't been a Predator movie quite like this one or the first one. They really are specific to their. Well, I mean, really that era of movies is kind of gone, unfortunately. But yeah, it just has that real great. Late 80s, early 90s feel. It's 1990, so it really kind of still feels like an 80s movie a little bit. Yeah, so that's my history. It didn't jive with me at first, but it wasn't like a major, I hate this movie. It just finally, it took a little bit for me to see it in full. So yeah, that's my history for Predator and Predator 2.
Predator 2, oh boy, I have a shit ton of nostalgia for this movie. Debatably more than the first, because I was actually wrong. Predator 2 was the very first of the series that I saw in full. I saw snippets of the first film on TV when I was very young, but on home video, Predator 2 was the first that I watched. I was watching this movie a lot at a friend of my mom's place. He was a big movie nut. He loved Godzilla movies. He loved the Starship Troopers films, and he loved Star Wars, King Kong, and he also loved Alien and Predator. But the only one that he had was Predator 2. But I watched the living shit out of this movie. And also back in the good old glory days of Blockbuster, I would rent Predator and Predator 2. Like I always, if I rented one, the next time I went there, I always got the other one. And as I stated in my original terrible Predator 2 review, there was that one night where the entire penthouse scene where the city hunter just slaughters all of these voodoo dudes, I slow-moed it. What the fuck was wrong with me? Whatever. But yeah, I was obsessed with this movie as a young one. And as the years have gone by, this movie, I always just have really fond memories of this movie. I've watched this movie with my brother. I've watched this with another friend of mine who's a big fan of the Alien and Predator films. And I've just rewatched this movie so many times. I could list off entire scenes just from memory alone. So I adore this movie. And at one point, I did say that this is my number one favorite in the franchise. Upon my most recent viewing, it hasn't lost value per se, but now I'm just really not so sure because it's so neck and neck with the first movie. I don't really know what to say is my favorite, because if there's something that I find lacking in Predator 2, the first film makes up for that. But if there's something I find lacking in the first Predator film, Predator 2 makes up for that. So,
well, it actually makes sense that you used to like the second one more, because if you're really fascinated by this creature, this monster, the second one does dive into the culture and the gadgets and everything a whole lot more. And yeah, it's like you said, it balances out what the first movie doesn't have, and vice versa. So continue.
So yeah, I just love the shit out of this movie, and I think it's, as I've stated before, there's a lot of Alien and Predator fans out there, and for the record, I do consider the Alien movies and the Predator films to take place in the same continuity, or maybe not. Well, yeah, in the same universe. Obviously, because they're both 20th Century Fox franchises, they have 2 crossover films and they have a shit ton of comics. So I'm just like,
oh yeah,
screw it. And if you want to, you can even throw the Blade Runner movies into this series as well. So anyway, so
which I will say, and I'm actually going to make a post on this on Alien Day because I have some thoughts. I really just wish Ridley Scott had just made like a Blade Runner prequel or sequel, because he's clearly more interested in the android aspects of that universe. But yeah, more on that for Alien Day, which is this month. So anyway, continue.
Well, it seems that in the pantheon of Alien and Predator fans, Predator 2 seems to more often than not just get kind of left behind and just like discarded to the side, which I think is a big shame because, as Trev just said, there's a lot of world building and lore expanding in Predator 2 for the Yautja culture. But despite that, it just kind of seems like more often than not, people choose to ignore Predator 2. And I think that's a damn shame. Also, yeah, check out the Justice League and Avengers posters right above my head. I saw those and I just instantly had to get them.
Nerd. Very nice, very nice. Hey, you're actually going to have to show this to me closer if you can when we're done.
Sure. So, with all that being said, let us jump into the plot of Predator 2, shall we? Though, do you have anything to add before we begin, Trev?
No, I'll just save it till after we're done with the plot.
In 1997, Los Angeles. Yeah, this movie came out in 1990, but it takes place for some reason. I only guess because they wanted to have the 10-year difference between the first movie and this. This movie takes place in 1997. Los Angeles is, huh?
Semi-futuristic.
Los Angeles is suffering from both a heat wave and a massive turf war between heavily armed Colombian and Jamaican drug cartels. This is one of my favorite aspects of this movie, though it leads to one of my biggest nitpicks of this film, but whatever. A younger Yautja member, just known in this movie as the City Hunter, watches a shootout between the police, Jamaicans, and Colombians. Literally talk about starting this movie with a bang.
Hey, let me point out, it's pretty much if they started the original Predator with the scene where they siege on the camp. It's pretty much if they started it like that.
Yep. Observing as Lieutenant Michael R. Harrigan, played by the awesome Danny Glover. I'm just going to get this out of the way. Predator 2 has a massive, massive Lethal Weapon vibe, considering it has 3 cast members from the Lethal Weapon series. Danny Glover, the guy who played the police captain in all 4 Lethal Weapon movies, so he plays a very small part in the opening of this movie. And, of course, the main villain from the first Lethal Weapon, Gary Busey, as one of the... Would you say he's an antagonist in this movie, or is he just kind of, like, there?
He's not super... Well, I mean, I guess he is technically an antagonist because he's working against our lead. But it's just only because their goals are different. It's not like he's out to get Harrigan or anything.
So anyway, yeah, Michael R. Harrigan charges into the firefight to rescue 2 wounded soldiers and drive the Colombians back into their hideout. The city hunter assaults the Colombians, causing a disturbance that prompts Harrigan and detectives Leona Cantrell, played by Maria Conchita Alonso. Shit, I totally lost count. And Danny Archuleta, played by.
It looks like Ruben Blades, but I think it's Ruben Blades, maybe.
Ruben Blades. Sure yeah, all 3 of these defy orders and enter the Colombian hideout. They find all the Colombians have just been slaughtered. And on the roof, Harrigan shoots the crazed gang leader, El Scorpio, and catches a glimpse of the camouflaged predator, but dismisses it as a consequence of the extreme heat and his acrophobia, fear of heights. At the station, Harrigan is reprimanded by his superiors for his disobedience. He is introduced to Special Agent Peter Keyes, played by Gary Busey, leader of a task force investigating the various cartels in LA, and also Detective Jerry Lambert, played by the awesome Bill Paxton. And yeah, Bill Paxton is the only actor to be killed by a xenomorph, a Yautja, and a Terminator.
They also wanted him to be the cook in AVP Requiem, so he would have been killed by a Pred alien
too. Okay. Jerry Lambert is brought in as the newest member of Harrigan's team. Later that evening, interrupting a scene of fucking, Jamaicans enter the Colombian drug lord's Ramon Vega, his penthouse, and they ritualistically murder him. But they are then slaughtered by the city hunter, one of the best scenes in the film. Harrigan's team sees the drug lord's body and the skinned corpses of the Jamaicans suspended from the rafters, noting the similarity to the earlier Colombian massacre, which is one of the creepiest scenes in the film. Keyes arrives and kicks Harrigan's team out. Danny later returns to continue investigating, and after he finds one of the city hunter's spear-tip weapons in the air conditioning vent, the lurking city hunter then proceeds to kill him. And another one of the kind of creepiest scenes in the film. An enraged Harrigan vows to bring down Danny's killer. Forensic analysis reveals the spear tip is not composed of any known element on Earth's periodic table. Seeking answers, Harrigan meets with Jamaican drug lord King Willie, a voodoo practitioner. King Willie tells Harrigan that the killer is indeed supernatural and that he should prepare himself for battle against him. Harrigan leaves before the city hunter kills King Willie, taking his head as a trophy. Tracing a lead indicating Danny's killer had recently been in a slaughterhouse, Harrigan arranges to meet his team at a warehouse district to investigate. Cantrell and Lambert take the subway to the rendezvous when the city hunter, hunting Harrigan's subordinates, suddenly attacks. Lambert and numerous armed passengers are killed, but Cantrell is spared after the city hunter's scan of her body reveals that she is with child. Arriving on scene, Harrigan chases the fleeing city hunter but is intercepted by Keyes' men. Keyes reveals that the killer is an extraterrestrial hunter with infrared vision that uses active camouflage and has been hunting humans for sport throughout armed conflicts, most recently, of course, in Central America 10 years prior. Keyes and his team have set up a trap in a nearby slaughterhouse using thermally insulated suits and cryogenic weapons to capture it for study. Why do people think capturing giant monsters will always get them money?
Yeah, I guess he would be a giant monster since he's like almost 12 feet tall, almost looks like. Anyway.
When the city hunter arrives, the trap is sprung. However, the suspicious predator uses its mask to scan through various electromagnetic wavelengths to identify the team's flashlights, and it easily outmaneuvers and slaughters the men. Harrigan attacks the city hunter, badly wounding it before it rallies, destroying his weapon and closes in. Harrigan is saved by the sudden reappearance of Keyes, who tries to freeze the alien. However, he is bisected by one of my favorite of its weapons, the smart disc. The city hunter chases Harrigan to a roof, and the two foes clash, leaving them hanging from a ledge. The city hunter tries to activate its self-destruct device, but Harrigan severs it with its smart disc, rendering the device useless. The city hunter falls through an apartment window, heals its wounds, and flees. Harrigan follows it down an elevator shaft and finds a spacecraft in an underground chamber. Inside the ship, after discovering a trophy room with various skulls, including that of a xenomorph, Harrigan battles the city hunter in a final duel and kills him with the smart disc. A whole group of predators suddenly appear and collect their dead comrade, while one of them presents Harrigan with an antique flintlock pistol as a trophy. There actually was a short mini comic series that explained the origin of this predator. This is an elder predator, and this takes place during like the 1700 or yeah, like early 1700s, and it belonged to some kind of pirate whom, while he and some of his men were trying to bury some stolen gold, this elder predator was tracking the captain. And then all of a sudden, his men decided to turn on him. And him being outnumbered, this predator decided to jump in and save his prey. So they both teamed up and killed them all. But then they engaged in a duel. The predator, of course, won and killed him, but then honored his fallen foe and took his pistol as a reminder. But then gives away the flintlock pistol as a trophy to Harrigan. Harrigan then escapes from the ship as it takes off, kind of mirroring the thermonuclear explosion from the first film. He reaches the surface just as the remainder of Keyes' team arrives. As Keyes' subordinate Garber curses their lost opportunity to capture the alien, Harrigan privately muses that the beings will, of course, return, thus ending the film, and we never see Harrigan in the rest of the franchise. Shame.
So yeah, a couple things. I do believe before Robert Rodriguez revised it into what we more or less later saw with Predators, the original idea for the third Predator movie was supposed to be that period piece in the 1700s. It was going to take place on a ship. So it wouldn't be exactly like the comic book story, but it would be within that time period. It's interesting why this movie wasn't received so well, because you would think Lethal Weapon was popular at this time, just like
Well, the second movie had just come out the year before.
Yeah. It's funny because Predator is basically Commando with a monster. It was actually conceived originally as a Rambo movie before they turned it into it was supposed to be it was originally pitched as an installment for the Rambo series where he would fight an alien, but eventually that script became what we saw with Predator. But the Predator is basically Commando with a monster. And also, that the inspiration for that Rambo sequel was supposed to be Rambo meets Alien, like the movie Alien. So that's why they came up with it.
That would have been cool.
It's so weird that this. And also, we're going to get off on a Rambo tangent. I do believe Rambo 5 almost was a movie where he fought a monster. Anyway, and I don't think it got too far, because eventually it turned into Rambo Last Blood, but that was floating for a little bit, which I would have loved, but, I digress. It's weird that this wasn't more successful, because like Commando, the whole reason why the first Predator was as popular as it was is because Arnold was at the peak of his early acting career pretty much, and it took on another phase after Terminator 2 for a little bit. It's just weird because, you know, they have Danny Glover, who's also in Lethal Weapon. You'd think, oh, the Lethal Weapon crowd would, you know, come and see this maybe. But I think one of the big things that kind of created an air of controversy around this movie was the fact that it was almost NC-17.
Yes, it was.
That was a big.
Thankfully, it doesn't show because they did have to edit it down a bit to get an R rating. Thankfully, unlike many other movies where it was edited down to appease the crowd, this one doesn't show, at least not to my knowledge.
No, yeah. So unfortunately, even without the internet back then, the damage was kind of done. This movie had that video nasty, or it wasn't on video yet, but you know, like the video nasty label when something's like super hardcore, people just like, they're trying. Well, especially since even though this was the start of the '90s, it was still pretty much the '80s, so ultra conservative and whatnot. So you get that kind of rep. You get that kind of rep, unfortunately, and it just kind of sticks. And I think that's why the movie didn't perform better, unfortunately.
Well, in years since, it has been rediscovered and it's gotten a much larger appreciation, and it has become a cult classic, except just in Alien and Predator fan bases.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, it's kind of the same problem with all monster movies, is that their fan bases are the ones who rigorously defend them, and unfortunately the average audience is just kind of always
Well, it also doesn't help that similar to, well, this one isn't nearly as bad as like the Terminator series or even Star Wars, but even like in all fan bases, there's gonna be those people that just gatekeep the shit out of the franchise.
Yeah, and with Predator, for some reason, it's like the first movie is like that. I mean, it makes sense because it's the first movie, but the first movie in that fan base is kind of like the holy grail, and it's like you have to emulate that movie as much as possible. That's why some people prefer Predators to this one. But we'll get into that down the road. It's weird. It's like saying hold it against this movie that Arnold wasn't in it. And for one thing, he wasn't too enthused by the city idea, unfortunately.
Sadly, yeah.
And he also, around the same time, he was trying to decide whether he was going to do this or Terminator 2, and he chose to do Terminator 2, which, you know, worked out well for him.
Well, I don't hold that against Arnold. I do think that was the better choice.
Yeah.
Still, though, it would have been nice because in the novelization, there's a scene where Keyes talks about him actually meeting Dutch before Dutch disappeared. They explained that Keyes went to see him at a hospital. He was suffering from radiation sickness, and he was like kind of delirious and nuts. And he was told the story of what he encountered. And then it's stated that not long after that, Dutch escaped and disappeared. It will not resurface again in the Predator franchise until the DLC expansion for Predator Hunting Grounds that came out last year.
I wish he had showed up at the end of the Predator.
He was supposed to.
Not to get too, because we'll get into that. But they had so many weird endings, or another one that wouldn't make any sense continuity wise. But I do think the Arnold one would have been cool if he had showed up as Dutch. There also was an earlier version of this movie, which would have been set in New York during a blizzard, and it would have actually followed Dutch's brother. So I think maybe
played by Stallone. That would have been cool, though. Not really, but that would have been cool if he was played by Stallone.
Oh yeah, that'd been good. See, I don't know if Arnold was going to come back as Dutch or he was going to play this brother character, meaning that the Schaefer brothers are twins. I don't know if that was the case. I just know that an earlier version of this movie was supposed to follow either Dutch or his brother in New York during a blizzard. But
well, if that was the case, why not just make him be Dutch? Why make him Dutch's brother who looks exactly the same? Whatever.
that's the part where I'm not too sure, but I do know that that was an earlier version of the movie. So yeah.
So, your thoughts on the story?
It's really good, different from the first movie, obviously. But again, it's a Lethal Weapon movie meets Predator. It's Lethal Weapon meets Alien, just like they wanted Predator to be Rambo meets Alien or something to that effect, or Commando meets Alien. And so I don't pigeonhole the franchise because I think that the cop police drama is also just as neat as a Commando or Soldier movie. And if you throw a monster in there, it's even better. So yeah, and also I wanted to point out, I don't think Keyes and his guys wanted to do it for money. They said that what his technology could give us in terms of like our progression as a species, which was factored into the AVP movies.
With how like kind of slimy that Keyes comes off as being, I can kind of see. I think he was in it like half for the money, but he was using that just as a cover for his actual intentions. It sounds more noble if you say it's for humanity and not just for my pocketbook. So my thoughts on this story, it's an excellent sequel. I've said before in my now deleted Empire Strikes Back review, there's certain ways that you can do a sequel. You can either just do a carbon copy, which if Predator 2 was a carbon copy of the first film, would have been a far inferior film. Anyone who tries to say that this is a carbon copy of the first movie, you're an idiot. That's more Predators. Or if you hold against this movie for Arnold not being in it, which a lot of people do, it's like, why? Well, and also they have to realize that if he did this, we wouldn't have gotten Terminator 2. But yeah, so that's an interesting what if, is what if Arnold had done Predator 2. Or you can do a sequel that is so vastly different from its predecessor that it's almost unrecognizable, like Beneath the Planet of the Apes. But then there's another sequel where, like Empire Strikes Back, it's set in the same continuity. It's part of that franchise. It's not a carbon copy, but there's still a lot of elements from the previous movie that are present here to make it feel right at home and as a companion piece with the first film. It takes the ideas from the first movie, beefs them up to 11 because this movie had a much larger budget, of course, with a $20 to $30 million budget. And it expands on its lore, it expands on its characters, and it expands on its monster. So in my opinion, this is an excellent, excellent sequel. Also, like Terminator 2. It takes elements from the first Terminator, expands upon them, and beefs them up to 11. This, in my opinion, Predator 2 is one of the top 10 greatest horror sequels, sci-fi sequels, monster sequels, and just sequels in general. Seems like the 90s was a really good decade for sequels. To say the least. Even though the casts for Terminator 2 and the example I'm about to give, RoboCop 2, are carried over from the first movies, I compare the RoboCop movies, the first two, and the Predators a whole lot. They feel like they come from the same era, and they also came out the same years. 87 was RoboCop. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, and 90 was Predator 2 and RoboCop 2, and both RoboCop 2 and Predator 2 kind of got shat on whenever they came out when they didn't deserve it. So yeah, I think those are really comparable, and the Terminators can be compared with the first two Alien movies a whole lot. So yeah, they all definitely have that same vibe because they're all from the same era. So, Man, the late 80s and early 90s, such a good decade for sci-fi movies. Well, and the sad thing is that Hollywood is still trying to milk that era as much as possible. To varying levels of success. Yes. But yeah, I love this movie's story. And one thing that I really do like is that they didn't just make it a cops versus alien movie. They did include a cops versus human story, but they work it into the cops versus alien story so well that it doesn't feel like it sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, in my opinion, this movie is the furthest example of something having Sinister 2 syndrome as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I'll get more into that when we get into our pros and cons. So how many you got, Trev?
Let me see. I do believe I have 8. Let me pull them up.
I have 10 pros.
Okay. Yeah, hold on. My laptop's doing something. Yeah, I do believe I have 8.
Go right ahead.
Come on. Get them on. Come on. Okay, well, thankfully I have the first one memorized. My first pro is the city hunter, the predator himself. I definitely, it makes sense because probably my second favorite predator, actually it's kind of neck and neck, these two. My second favorite predator out of all the movies is Wolf. And they actually have similar design masks. Wolf, obviously, his is black and has several different markings to show his history as a veteran of the species. But they definitely took that same aesthetic, very sleek, not as round as the original Jungle Hunter's mask or Scar from AVP. Yeah, they're a lot more rounded. Wolves and the City Hunters masks they kind of have like a length to them. They're kind of slender. It's just a real neat aesthetic in my opinion. He has a different color scheme too.
Yeah, he's more pale with red stripes all over his skin.
Yeah, and even his face is a lot more elaborate. I mean, his mandibles, they didn't go too crazy with the mandibles until ADI took over the designs. But there are you can tell there's better mechanics going on in the first movie a little bit. Yeah, just a really eye-catching. I think Stan Winston. Oh, this is also the last movie that Stan Winston was involved in when it came to Predator. Unfortunately,
sadly, I think he was leaning more towards the. Well, even though, because after this, Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff took over the Alien series too.
They did, yeah. So I don't know what the deal was. I guess he only wanted to do 1 and 2, but then it took forever to make another Predator-related thing. So
sadly,
there is that. Yeah, and even when they did, ADI had kind of taken over Alien. So because the next time we saw Predator, they were sharing the screen with Xenomorphs. I think ADI were the ones who just thought, well, we should do Predators too.
And they look fantastic. Anyway, yeah. More on that tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think Stan said that he wanted it to have a more urban look, this particular Predator.
Very.
Which I guess kind of is a lot more flashy for the character himself, because he is a character. That's one of the great things about the Predators is that they have character, personality. He's kind of reckless, unfortunately, but he's still he doesn't like zero in on one particular incident that's going on in the city. He's kind of watching the gang war, but then he becomes intrigued by Harrigan in particular. He becomes intrigued by the police side of things, and that apparently it catches his attention more because Harrigan, as I'll elaborate on here in a minute, is rather devoted to his cause once he catches wind of what's going on. But yeah, he also has a bunch of new gadgets. The smart disc. I think I kind of prefer the shurikens a little bit more, but the smart discs.
They're called glaives in AVP. I know what you're talking about. They're called glaives.
His spear is really cool. Although they did narrow it down for AVP, it's kind of chunky and thick, but it looks like it could really do some damage, and it does actually.
That's called the combi stick.
There we go. Thank you. I'm glad you're here with all the terms. And there are my pros. There we go. So the new gadgets. With him, we kind of get more into the lore. if you listen to the commentary with the Thomas brothers who wrote Predator 1 and 2, they say their original idea for this movie was that it was supposed to be like a tribe or a clan of predators who land outside LA, and they're all supposed to, or not even just LA, they land in the area and each predator on the ship goes and does their own thing.
But those suits got stolen.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, that scene where Predator meets that tribe, or totally, where Harrigan meets that tribe at the very end, that was the only scene they were able to shoot because the rest of those suits got stolen.
Oh, that's right. Ironically, there was a similar situation on the set of Requiem, but I'll get into that when we get there. The whole idea that the Thomas brothers had was that the ship lands in the area, and then all the predators on the ship go and do their own thing. That's why we see them at the end. Because they're all coming back with their trophies and their kills and whatnot. So the City Hunter himself, design-wise, I really like him. It's neck and neck with Wolf in terms of my favorite Predator out of any of the movies. I like his gear. I like what he brings to the mythos, and I'm sure you'll elaborate on that too. He's definitely just to point. We already kind of said this. The first two movies kind of even each other out. There's things you like about the first one that the second one may not have, but then the second one balances out. And I think the Predator in this definitely is the stronger aspect for this particular movie.
Played once again by Kevin Peter Hall.
Yes, indeed. Who probably, to be honest, really hasn't been beat in terms of playing the Predator. I think Ian White did okay for the AVP movies, particularly Requiem, again, because the Predator in that movie is the shining saving grace.
In a sea of excrement.
Kevin...
Scar, I think, comes pretty close, too.
But Kevin brought something to the role that, unfortunately, I wish we could see more of. But you do know what he died of, right?
Yeah, he died of AIDS because he had a botched blood transfusion.
Yeah. So.
Ouch.
Yeah, pretty tragic. He was also Harry in the Hendersons.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, I could be mistaken, there was an early B movie called not Silent Mornings, Without Warning, which was about a alien that hunted people, and it was a lot. You know about this?
Because Brendan Tenold did an episode on that.
Yeah, and I do believe Kevin Peter Hall was the alien in that movie too, and that was several years earlier, at least 10 years before this movie.
1980.
He had a history of playing giant or tall creatures.
Damn.
So undeniably, pro number one is the City Hunter. What, did you find something?
Kevin Peter Hall's dad was 6'6", and his mom was 6'2". He was the tallest of 7 brothers, all over 6'5", and he himself was 7'2".
Shit. That's some tall folks for you.
And yeah, he did play the alien in Without Warning.
Well, and Arnold also said, I think, oddly enough, when he was promoting the first Predator, he said that the hunting alien concept had been done before, but obviously Predator took it in a whole different direction. But anyway, so moving right along, my second pro is I feel that this is a successful blending with another action genre, and as I mentioned, the police drama, or basically the Lethal Weapon kind of movie. I think this is a really good mixing of that. And again, like I said before, it's really unfortunate that it didn't find that same audience at the time. It's unfortunate the rating controversy kind of threw people off of it. It also came out around Thanksgiving, so or on Thanksgiving. I think there's TV spots and trailers that say that. It's weird because Requiem came out Christmas Day, so interesting.
Oh yeah, that's right, it did.
Yeah. Not what you would expect for that season, but I mean, I would go see those movies around that time. So yeah, I do think, despite the reputation, this is a very good blending with the Lethal Weapon genre. I mean, it is Lethal Weapon meets Alien.
Which I'm not gonna lie, there is a part of me that kind of also does want to group the Lethal Weapon continuity in with the Predator continuity as well. But because Harrigan and Murtaugh, they're similar characters, but they're also very different. And also, they're played by the same actor, but they have totally different names and personalities. That's really the biggest monkey in that wrench.
It would have been cool if they left it a little bit more vague, so you could say, "I wonder if he left LA and changed his name or something." Wait, no, hold on. I'm sorry. Do the Lethal Weapon movies take place in LA? So yeah, excuse me, that wouldn't have worked. But he maybe could have still changed his name. What happened to Mike Harrigan? Ooh, no, I don't know. Something funny like that. Well, especially like with the way this movie ends, it'd be like, what does he do after this? Oh, I should have mentioned, aside from doing the period piece for a potential third Predator movie, another idea for like the whole taking them to another planet concept was that it was supposed to be Dutch and Harrigan who were taken, and they were supposed to be involved in that game preserve plot.
That would have been cool.
That would have been. It would also involve contracts and money and stuff like all that pesky business. It seems like Danny. I don't know how he feels about this one. It seems like he may kind of wanted to distance himself from it. And Arnold, he's always very particular about how he's going to come back, because part of the reason why Predators was written the way it was is because Robert was trying to get Arnold to be interested in coming back, but it just didn't work out. So anyway, not much else to say about Pro number 2 except for the fact that I do think this is a pretty good meshing of Lethal Weapon with the monster movie genre. So yeah, definitely one of its highlights. And like we were saying at the end of the plot synopsis, it still feels like it should come after the first Predator, because they're a blending of the horror and the sci-fi genre, which were popular in the 80s, mainly because of the practical effects revolution. It's a blending of that with the other popular genre of the time. So, it just makes sense. And so moving right along, Pro number 3 is the effects. I kind of got into this with the City Hunter himself, but Stan Winston and his team, his studio, they killed it. If this was
no pun intended.
If this was to be their last time doing a Predator movie, which as it turned out it was, they went all out. I mean, not just the Predator himself, but even that. I should mention the cloaking effects, even though.
They're still a little dated, but they're much more well animated than in the first film.
They're a lot more bold. That you can tell they're a bit more comfortable with it because they show it more often, and there's a lot more like the scene where he jumps into the alley and is about to kill King Willie. That was very what's the term?
Smooth.
It was smooth, but it was also just the fact it's almost like the T-1000 and T-2. That kind of what the word I'm looking for. It's very revolutionary, very ballsy for them to do that kind of effect at the time. Whenever it wasn't all that great, like the CG and T2. That was like a brand new technology.
Experimental.
Yeah, experimental. I don't know. It just feels historical. The fact that they were starting to really mess around with that, because they show how they filmed that particular scene, and it's just very intricate how they get the water to react the right way that it's supposed to, like whenever he's stepping, because the alley stuff itself was separate, and the invisibility effect was filmed elsewhere, and they had to match them up, which wasn't all that easy to do, again, because CGI and all that wasn't where it is now, or even where it was in the late 90s. So I think revolutionary probably gets the closest to what I'm looking for. But anyway, it's still a little bit buggy, these effects, those particular effects, but still very impressive with how much more they show it off.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from, like the practical when we see the Predator revealed and his gear and whatnot, all those look great. Oh, I should also mention the fact that he's gold, like his mask is gold and like his equipment is gold. That also
Well, I don't think
out.
it's quite gold. I think it's more like a bronzish color.
There you go, bronze. That's fitting. And the ship, they actually, whenever they were planning out or coming up with the concept for AVP, they look back to the ship here in Predator 2, and it does have that very Mayan, Aztec kind of aesthetic to it. Well, that just kind of factors in the whole ritual tribal kind of aesthetic, so it makes sense. But yeah, I'm sure you're going to say more about it. The effects in this movie are wonderful. Probably one of Stan Winston's best, in my opinion, or at least one of my personal favorites.
One of his more overlooked and unsung masterpieces.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, pro number 4 is Harrigan. We got into him a little bit, but it's hard not to like Danny Glover, to be honest. Harrigan is a bit impulsive, and clearly I like that there's a little. They don't go into it super deep, but there is like a hint of the fact that he and Danny kind of had a rough upbringing. They grew up on the street. You can tell that Harrigan has a lot of anger, probably based on his past experiences. So it's not super in depth, but it's just enough to suggest character.
Well, I don't think they had a rough upbringing. Like, what do you mean, like upbringing as kids or starting out as police officers? That's what it stuck out more to me, starting out as cops.
Okay, well,
because they state that Mike has been a cop for 18 years at this point in the film. And to me, it's very obvious that Mike and Danny started off as partners when they started off as cops. So that came off to me like they were beat cops, and they just had a rough time in the first few years as cops.
Yeah, because whenever he's like super pissed,
15 years on the fucking street.
Yeah, so actually, you know what? You might be right, but at the same time, I kind of thought that maybe they knew each other when they were kids. Also,
they might have.
But then I don't know how old Ruben Blades is compared to Danny Glover. So maybe the partner thing makes more sense instead of them growing up together. But anyway, yeah, even then with what you said, still the history is suggested there, and again, not in depth. It's just a line, and unfortunately, movies can't, or they don't seem to do this well anymore, where just a simple line of dialogue says so much. Like you can just imagine what their history together is. And also kind of, just a side note, since we're talking about Danny, the scene where he gets killed is kind of, like you said, creepy, but also disturbing in the fact that he's trying to reason with the Predator before he gets killed. You wouldn't do that with a xenomorph because they would just outright kill you. But the fact that the Predator is kind of like a humanoid being, it's like he was trying to reason with it, and that just kind of makes it a little fucked up, makes it creepy. So anyway, side note on that. But no, Harrigan himself, just a go-get-him protagonist. Again, the way this movie starts is like pretty much how I think it's like 30 or maybe 20 minutes into the original Predator whenever they finally get to the camp, and
roughly about 25 minutes.
Yeah, so here in this movie, it's like starting off with that, and you immediately realize that Harrigan is not. Yeah, you realize that Harrigan isn't somebody to be fucked with because he comes behind the gangsters and fucks them up. It's like he knows.
Hey, assholes! Boom.
Yeah, he feels like a veteran of this gang war. And again, it's just that nice little bit of character that is executed not through exposition, but just how like they're acting or like a line of dialogue or something like that. What's the name of that one cop? I think he gets like completely obliterated when Scorpio comes out of the door, and it's the one white guy in the SWAT uniform. You remember his name? he tells the other guys to be Mike's backup whenever he goes in there. But anyway, I just wanted to say a nice little bit of trivia. That guy is actually Richard Donner's brother, and Richard Donner directed the Lethal Weapon movie.
No, I don't think they give his name. I don't. No, they might have. I just can't remember it off the top of my head.
No, yeah, I just wanted to say that's a neat little bit of trivia that also goes into Lethal Weapon is that a member of the Donner family, who are also involved with the Lethal Weapons, made a cameo in this movie.
He's a dude that gets gunned down when Scorpio comes bursting out of the door, right?
Yeah, he's Richard Donner's brother. So I learned that from the commentary also. I think Stephen Hopkins' commentary, which, by the way, Nightmare on Elm Street 5 is kind of a not too impressive debut for some people, but I think Predator 2 and The Ghost in the Darkness, which is Jaws with lions, those are two movies that...
Love that movie.
Yeah, he directed Predator 2 and that one, so pretty cool stuff. But yeah, I'm going off in the weeds, but still, Harrigan, it's Danny Glover. He brings it. He sells it great. I mean, just, or even also like the funeral, or not the funeral scene, but where he goes to visit Danny's grave, and we also hear the little bit of music from the original Predator whenever...
Which I realized the last time I watched this, I rewatched this movie kind of twice before we did this. I rewatched the whole thing, and then I just went back and watched all the cool scenes. But I stumbled across that, and I realized that was the same military trumpet sound when Mac was bidding farewell to Blaine. That was the same piece of music when Mike was visiting Danny's grave. Excuse me.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm not going to linger on too much longer. It's Danny Glover, basically being a badass cop, and he's fighting a predator. So what more can you want? All right, so pro number 5 is Jerry, surprisingly, Jerry Lambert. Because some people might find him annoying, but I think Hudson in Aliens is a lot more annoying. Mainly because...
Yeah.
Well, because Jerry has a bravado and a cockiness. I mean, it's kind of the same cockiness as Hudson, but he doesn't he's not irritating about it, and he doesn't fold, completely curl up in a ball whenever things get rough.
And he also kind of has that go-get-him attitude that, he immediately sees that there's shit going down and he needs to keep himself together in order to help out.
Yeah, so even though Harrigan's we don't have any room for showboats here, Jerry basically proves himself rather quickly. And it
done real good, kid.
And also he feels like a natural addition to their group dynamic. Even though it did kind of remind me, it's not super the same thing. Whenever he first meets Leona, they kind of have this who has the bigger balls kind of face-off thing going on, which kind of reminded me of Hudson and Vasquez in Aliens. But
Vasquez, come on now. You live in Texas.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Hey, Vasquez,
anyway,
you ever been mistaken for a man? No. Have you?
Yeah, and I think they were definitely going for that. So again, it's another sad thing.
Maybe a little bit, just because, Bill Paxton was also in Aliens, and this is also a 20th Century Fox film, that they're kind of trying to recapture that kind of, maybe not the tone of Aliens, but that kindred camaraderie spirit of Aliens. Just take that from the military and apply it to law enforcement.
Yeah, exactly. And they had to be aware of that somewhat. Maybe if they didn't try to do it intentionally, it just kind of turned out that way, which is also a sad thing that Predator 2 wasn't as well received as Aliens, because Aliens did very well and even was part of the Oscars for 1987. So, it did, I think Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Actress because of that movie in 87. So, yeah, Aliens got lots of accolades. But anyway, Yeah, it's nice to see Bill here again. Probably a slightly better character than Hudson, even though Hudson is kind of endearing in his own way. I think I do prefer Jerry a little bit more.
Well, at least Hudson is able to take some Xenos out before he bites the dust. And he does kind of redeem himself toward the end where he like tries to pull his head out of his ass and he's like he tries to steal himself. But God, you and I are good. I see another 2-hour review when you and I review Aliens. Because there's just so much to talk about with that film. But I can see how some people may find Jerry annoying, but I do think in some ways Jerry is a better character than Hudson. But similar to Predator and Predator 2, there's things about Jerry and Hudson that kind of balance each other out.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, you just immediately think of the two characters that he played because...
But I will admit, I do think kind of Jerry is the more entertaining character because he's funnier. I need a semen, stool, and urine sample. Gee, Doc, I'm in a big hurry. Can I just leave my underwear? What a fucking twat.
The door swings both ways, my ass.
This door swings both ways.
Yeah.
Keep talking. I'll be right back. I'm going to grab something.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my next pro if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so pro number 6 would be Keys. Again, even though he's a slightly antagonistic character, and you're kind of rooting for Harrigan to come out on top over Keys. Hopefully nobody takes that the wrong way because that sounded kind of perverted. But no, whenever Gary Busey's in a movie, usually you just can't help but like him. So yeah, Keys is again somewhat an antagonistic character, but he whenever he shows up again after you thought that he'd been dead, it's kind of like, oh yeah, now stuff is going to really go down.
And which leads to Keys having an incredibly over-the-top death.
Yeah, and again, it just seems to fit Gary Busey's persona because he has a reputation for being a weirdo, you know? So it just makes sense that when he's in one of these monster movies that he would have like this over-the-top death.
Gotta say, my favorite Gary Busey role is gotta be as Uncle Red in Silver Bullet.
Yeah, and I was actually going to bring that up because even though Keys is a much more not as sympathetic character, I mean, just Gary Busey brings that energy to this kind of movie that, you know, just seems right for the genre. He seems like an actor who should do more of these kind of things, more of these monster movies, you know, because he's just such a great campy genre presence. I don't know how to word it exactly. It just feels right whenever he shows up in something like this.
It's a shame that he's so underutilized in the first Ginger Dead Man movie.
Yeah. Well, see, even then, he's like the main character in that, too. So, it's weird. But, yeah, not much to say about Keys, I guess, even though he's a pro. It's just, again, Gary Busey shows up. You know, he makes an impact. Even if he is kind of a douchebag, he's still, in my opinion, a memorable part of this movie. Enough to where, you know, they had some connective tissue that popped up later in The Predator. But more on that later. Yeah, so he's my pro number 6. And now a technical thing. Pro number 7 is the score. I think actually it might be a little bit more on point here. Because I think, like you said in your review, Nick, there's times where it's not like super engaging, but there's times where like the main theme is used, and it's like
here it's more distinct.
Yeah, and it's very, in my opinion, a very iconic theme, at least for
like that. I mean, that jungle bongo sound effect, or even
the you know,
that
stuff
too.
Like that, or even the creepier creepier parts of the thing, like the ba-na-bum, stuff like that. It's all kind of quieter, Since I didn't do the first review with you, like just the movie, the original Predator. What's up?
Oh, I was humming that piece of music that plays when Dutch was walking through the trap, and also when Danny was climbing into the rafters before he's killed.
Oh yeah, exactly. And even the part before that, anytime somebody's like kind of sneaking or trying to be quiet, that theme kind of plays under them, whatnot. And also, and like I was about to say, I wanted to mention, unfortunately, Predator 2 doesn't really have any of these moments, but the first Predator has a character speaking and they're telling like a story or they're painting a picture with their description of what they're talking about. Billy does that in the first Predator when he's talking about what happened to Hopper's men.
Oh, right. They were shooting in all directions. Can't believe Jim Hopper walked into an ambush. I don't believe he did. I can't find a single track. There's no sign, sir. They never left here. Hell, it's like they just disappeared. Again, movies don't do that nowadays. It's a shame.
Oh yeah, it creates so much atmosphere. It's so eerie whenever somebody talks about something we didn't see.
Less is more, which is totally lost nowadays.
Yeah, or another great example, probably even more famous, is Quint.
Oh yeah, from Jaws.
Story. Whenever he tells his story, that's another one of those creepy things. And this just shows my fanboyism for Tremors. Even like whenever they first discover the graboid tentacle, under the truck, and Val's like, "So you think there might be more out there?" And, it's just a combination of the music and whatnot and everything. It just, movies don't have that anymore. It's just such a great creep factor. But anyway, yeah, the score kind of factors into that. Definitely helps it out. The action heavy stuff is iconic. Actually, the whole score is iconic. If I heard this somewhere, I would immediately say that's from Predator or Predator 2, or it's used in all the movies, but this is Alvin Silvestri's two movies that he actually did. Yeah, Alan? Is it Alan? I thought it was Alvin.
No, anyway. It's Alan Silvestri.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the score, an undeniable pro of both the first two movies. And finally, my last pro. This movie does have a legacy to it, despite the reputation that some in the fandom kind of assigned to it. This was very influential for Predator stuff going forward. The big thing is that it planted the seed for the AVP franchise. There also wouldn't be, regardless whether you like Batman or not, it also planted the seed for Batman versus Predator, because you have a cops versus Predator story, and then let's have a Predator in Gotham City. That makes sense. The video game Concrete Jungle, which I do believe was an early title for this movie, because it was or a comic book miniseries too from Dark Horse. I think there was one that was called that. But the video game Concrete Jungle, even though the graphics and the gameplay are heavily criticized, I think the story for that game would actually make a really good Predator movie. And it also even ties into Alien, because the Weyland-Yutani company does come up in the plot of that game. So yeah, it's just really, it all started with the fact that Predator said, okay, let's not just stay in the jungle, even if some people prefer that. Let's move this to an urban area, because that's another thing. Just like meshing Lethal Weapon with the monster movie, it also makes sense to, in order to follow up the first movie, you do a different kind of jungle, which is the concrete jungle. It keeps it fresh. It's still kind of a chaotic environment, although the jungle is a lot more isolated and creepy. I guess that might be what appeals to people more than the city. But the city just adds like a whole different dynamic to it, with like the gang wars, and like if you're chasing the Predator, you can like run through somebody's apartment or something. It just adds all these different great creative possibilities that you don't get if you just stay in the jungle. So yeah, I definitely think the legacy of this movie is more impactful than some in the fan base would give it credit for. So yeah, that's my last pro.
Pro number one for me is the characters overall. Mike is a total fucking badass. This is Murtaugh without Riggs getting in his way and holding Riggs back and stealing his spotlight. Not that I'm saying that's a bad thing in the Lethal Weapon movies, because as I stated in my Lethal Weapon 3 review, that's Murtaugh's time to shine, which is another reason why that's my favorite Lethal Weapon film. But here, because this isn't Murtaugh and Riggs is nowhere to be seen, Danny Glover is able to fully embrace the 80s or 90s action hero. And he embraces it and he makes it so fucking awesome. He's a total, utter badass in this movie. You can tell he's been in LA for a long time. He's been a police officer for a long time. He has knowledge and he has skill in being a badass police officer. And yeah, he has a lot of anger, but you don't really get the sense that he's just inherently an asshole. He just takes his duties as a police officer very, very seriously. Like, he's very loyal to his team. He's very loyal to his job. And he, like I say, he takes his job very seriously and he knows how to get shit done. He's got that great go-get-him badass attitude as a great cop. And also the chemistry that he has with Danny and Jerry and Leona, it's all very believable. You can tell specifically 3, but same with Jerry. Like, them working together as a unit in the gang warfare shit. Like, I would almost want to see an entire movie about all 4 of these guys taking on 2 warring drug cartels. It's really good shit. Could even be its own unofficial, like, Murtaugh spinoff. Leona, she's probably like the least developed character in this film.
It doesn't do a whole lot, but the scene with her and the Predator does add to the lore, particularly their code.
Yeah, like, they don't attack people who are, they don't attack women who are with child. Again, there's just so much lore expansion in this, it's not even funny.
But hey, fuck them old ladies with the pistols on the train. Yeah.
True.
Remember, because we saw that from the vision, it just like takes out that old lady. Yeah, she was armed.
Well, she was armed. That's the thing. Anyway, so yeah, Leona's fine. She's like the good. She kind of acts like the audience. Like, as she's walking in and seeing all the carnage after the Colombians are slaughtered, she's kind of like the audience. She's just like in awe. Like, God damn, what the fuck happened in here? Danny, I like Danny's role as kind of like Mike's leash. Like, he's the one that kind of keeps Mike in check. Like, obviously he takes his job very seriously as well, and he's very dedicated to his job too, but he doesn't let his passion kind of cloud his actions, and he's aware that, there's times to do shit and there's times not to. Like, the first scene that you see that, right when Mike is about to beat the living shit out of his superior, "I'll show you insubordination, you son of a bitch." Danny just comes running and going, no. Let it go, Mike. It's just not worth it. Like, he's that good. He knows how to rein Mike in when he's about to do something that he's going to regret.
I also wanted to point out real quick, the superior, Heineman. He's played by Robert Davey, who you also said was in the Lethal Weapons. He's also the Bond villain in my favorite Bond movie, License to Kill, which is basically just an 80s revenge thriller. So, just a little side note.
What the hell was he in, too? Like, wasn't he?
Oh, Maniac Cop, Robert Davey.
That's who it is. Okay. Because I think he was also one of the villain in one of Arnold's more lesser known movies, Raw Deal. I think he was one of the main bad guys in that film. Anyway, so And then, of course, there's Jerry, played by the awesome Bill Paxton. Yeah, I like Jerry. He's funnier than Hudson. And he and Mike have two of my favorite moments in the entire movie. And they have to do with Tony Pope. Even Leona gets to dig at Tony Pope. Oh man, it's Pope! That parasite must live in his car. I'll handle it. PR is my specialty. Tony, my man. I'm your biggest fan, man. Well, I got a job to do. Your job is to go root for your garbage somewhere else. And then, of course, probably my third or second favorite scene in the whole movie. Hey, Harrigan. More victims, more mutilations. Fuck you!
Hey, I'll just say I should have added that as a pro. The humor in this movie is on point.
It's very subtle, but there are moments where, like, what's the kind of humor in this? It's not slapsticky, but it's just more.
It's not dark either. I don't know. I'm not sure.
But yeah, there's a bit of humor involved with this movie. It's a bit subtle, and it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it doesn't interfere with the action or the horror. It's just like that little moment of levity that just relieves the tension, because that's one thing that this movie is too. It's always tense. It's not really an angry movie per se, like Rambo Last Blood, but it's just a very stern, serious film. But the moments of humor are very welcome.
It's on point.
Yes.
It's whenever it's used, it's not awkward.
Uh-oh. Looks like he's trying to put the moves on Leona. Ah, his first big mistake.
Or shit happens. The Predator line from this movie.
Yep. Now, actually, I heard a lot about you. Yeah? Yeah! Like your last partner got shot? What? Well, Oi! You try any of that cowboy shit with me, fucker, you can kiss these goodbye. Got it? Ah, yeah, I got, Well, I see that you two have been acquainted. Lambert, if you're feeling up to it, why don't you limp your way in and go see the lieutenant? He wants to talk to you. All right. Ah!
Or it's even better because he says, I see the three of you have been acquainted. There you go.
That's the line. Okay. Yeah, so the characters are all great. They all have great chemistry. They're all very entertaining. They have their moment to shine in both humor, scares, and badassery. In terms of badassery, though, Jerry's kind of the least, but he does prove himself pretty well in the subway scene. Pro number 2 is the pacing of this movie. It never drags, kind of like with the first movie, but in a different way. This one is way more, well, I don't know, because it kind of ups the ante more so on the horror. I do think this is a stronger horror film because I will admit, when I first saw this movie when I was young, scared the crap out of me. So I do think that as a horror movie, this is a much stronger candidate than the first film. Because even when I was young, the first movie never ever scared me, but this one kind of did. But the pacing overall is very good. When it's slow and creepy and suspenseful, it kind of almost surpasses the first movie. There's just not as much as there was in the first film. Because the first film is just a big giant cat and mouse game, and there's elements of that here, but there's just less. But when it's fast and bombastic and getting your blood pumping, that's exactly what it does. And it does it very well. So yeah, overall, no scene drags. Nothing feels unnecessary. Nothing feels forced. And I also want to say, all 4 Predator movies have a runtime in the hour and 40-minute range. I think the first one's an hour and 42. Predator 2 is an hour and 48. I think Predators is also an hour and 48, and The Predator, I think, is an hour and 45. God, that's a terrible title.
They should have just kept on with the numbers, honestly.
Yeah, probably. The pacing is excellent. Pro number 3 is, oh God, the gore. The blood and gore in this movie is just nuts. Not talking about the effects, at least not quite yet. But the gore is on fleek. The first movie is by no means tame, but this movie takes the gore and violence and beefs it up to 10. Obviously, because this movie was originally NC-17, so that tells you something. But in its current state, like I said, I don't think it shows, at least not in my opinion. It doesn't show that it was edited. Obviously, I still would like to see that unedited footage, but
if it still
exists, probably not. I wouldn't be surprised. But the violence and gore in this movie is just nuts. You see blood spray everywhere. You see more skinned bodies. When people get shot, they spray blood. People die in some pretty horrific ass ways in this movie. And you even literally see a skull get scalped. And you hear the sucking brain sound effects. Ugh. So if you're a big gore nut, this movie has definitely got you covered.
I have seen that bigger people who are more action fans tend to like the Predator, the first Predator more, but people who like have a real like horror junkies, they kind of gravitate towards this one, I've noticed.
But speaking of which, pro number 4 is the action scenes in this movie are top notch. The opening action scene is one of my favorite action scenes of all time in any action movie. And it ends in such a badass way with Mike just grabbing an auto shotgun, moving around some thugs. He just goes, "Hey, assholes!" Mows these motherfuckers down with just like every time he shoots, one dude falls. Such a badass moment. And the rest of the action scenes throughout the movie are just on point. They're well choreographed. The gunplay is a lot of fun. Bullets fly. There's explosions. There's people dying. It's fucking entertaining as shit.
To say the least.
To say the least. Next pro is the scares are a lot better in this movie. Like Trev just said, if you're much more of a horror guy, this movie definitely has you covered. I think this is a stronger horror film. It's like nowadays, it still doesn't really scare me. It doesn't get under my skin or anything. But, as I said, as a kid, this movie did scare me. Because the jump scares are better. Like when Danny gets killed, it's one of those moments where all you see is you hear him scream, and then you see the blood spill out all over his torn necklace, and you hear the Predator screeching. That kind of still to this day gives me goosebumps a little bit because it's like one of those moments that leaves it up to your imagination.
Well, but also the fact that he's again, it's like he's trying to appeal to the Predator and he's begging him not to do it. That's what gets me, is that he's trying to reason with him and he still kills him. So,
Well, if he hadn't pulled out his gun, he might have been spared, but whatever.
They're armed. Everybody who gets killed is armed. At least in these first two.
Let's see. Just overall, probably the scariest moment in this entire movie is after the subway scene. Let's see, even then, I don't know. It's kind of debatable. No, I'd probably have to say that. The scariest scene in this movie is when, after the subway scene, Mike goes down the subway and he rounds a corner and you hear that scream of that. Was it Jerry who got his head torn off and his spine ripped out that Mike finds? Okay, so when you see the city hunter tearing out Jerry's spine, That's probably the scariest scene in the entire movie. You hear that blood-curdling scream. You hear that snapping, crackling sound. And you hear Mike scream, "No, Jerry!"
Hey, so
That
the
freaked
cover,
me out as a young one.
yeah, so the cover of my DVD, I don't know if it's for yours too, because I have the special edition. The cover of my DVD. Oh, you have the basic one. Does it show Mike on the cover? Like he's the larger image, and then the Predator is on the side. Yeah. No, but for my case, my DVD case, I have the special edition. It has the Predator holding up Jerry's skull and spine and looking at it. So basically, my DVD case has the Predator looking at Bill Paxton's skull. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, overall, the scares and the suspense is a lot stronger here. Even though there's less of it than there is in the first film, what we have is a lot stronger and it's more effective.
Well, you don't have to build it up so much because the audience now knows kind of what's happening. They know that there's a predator hunting the characters. In the first movie, we're gradually led into that.
Pro number 6 is the score. It is better than the first movie because Gone is the bit more generic action movie music of the first film. Here, the iconic Predator music takes its full shape, which they reused effectively, which is one of the good things that I can say about AVPR in that film. They reused a lot more Alan Silvestri's music. Here, the iconic music takes its full shape. It's very good. It's very entertaining. The jungle bongo sound effect is very catchy and it's very distinctive. And it's both badass but also spooky when it needs to be. Just overall, the music is a lot more theatrical. It's a lot more big and bombastic, and it's a lot more badass. And it fits the Predator theme. Like I said, Gone is the generic action movie elements that I'll say from the first movie. Not to say that the music in the first movie is bad. It's not. It's good. But it's more fitting here because now the Predator series has figured itself out.
Hey, I know you don't watch credits for movies, but man, hearing the theme in its full glory and just certain parts of it that are like drawn out, like right before the credits finish, there's a final title card that comes up that says Predator 2, and it's like a drawn out big drums, bum 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 bum. You know, it's just real cool. You can probably listen to it on YouTube, but yeah, that's one reason to watch the credits to hear the score. All right, continue.
Pro number 7 is the gang warfare in this film is really, really fascinating. And it's very fun. And it's extremely vicious. Like this shit, this could be its own movie. This does lead into a kind of a nitpick that I have with this film. It's understandable why it happens, but I'll elaborate on that later. But what we have here, the whole gang warfare aspect, it's really good. It's very well done, and in my opinion, it's very convincing. Which I don't know if my brother has seen this movie, but I'll bet you if he was to watch the first Predator and then watch this one, I think he would prefer this one more. You ever hear of the movie Blood In, Blood Out?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
I showed my brother that, and for those of you who don't know, it's like a police procedural prison drama, gang warfare, 3-hour and 10-minute epic film, which I used to own, but then I let one of my coworkers borrow it a year ago. Oops. Fantastic movie. The first time I watched that film, I just kept thinking my brother would love this movie. So I bought it for him. He calls me when he watches it at 3:00 in the morning saying, Blood In, Blood Out is a 10 out of 10 movie. It is so fucking good. And all I said is, well, bud, you woke me up, but I told you so. So yeah, the gang warfare, not much to say. It's not like Warriors, but it's way more violent than Warriors. Like, it's also a bit creepy and disturbing too, mostly because of the voodoo aspects of it. Like, these guys aren't fucking around, and these guys give no shits.
Well, and some of them don't even believe in it. They're just doing it because King Willie wants them to.
Oh yeah, but you know what? I'll tell you what I believe. Shit happens. It's really vicious and really nasty and kind of disturbing a bit too, because you literally do see this motherfucker get his heart cut out. Like, fuck. And it's also a bit reminiscent of a Steven Seagal movie. I think it was, what was it? It was his only like Fox movie, because usually he was a Warner Brothers stickler. What the hell was it? Maybe he was like marked for death, maybe?
Did it come out after this?
It might have, but it was basically Steven Seagal versus a whole bunch of Jamaican voodoo drug gangs. Good movie. But yeah, that's kind of reminiscent of this. So not much to say, but the gang warfare, it's really, really good, and it makes this movie, in my opinion, that much more distinctive. So yeah. Pro number 8 is the special effects in this movie are fucking fantastic. Obviously, yeah, this turned out to be Stan Winston's final Predator film, but boy, does he go out with a bang. The animatronics on the Yautja's face are much smoother and much more refined. Not to say that they were bad in the first movie, but when the Predator roars for the first time without its mask, the mandibles just kind of fold out, but they don't extend. Or if they do, it's a lot smoother. And it's a bit slower when he moves his mouthpieces. Here, they move much more fluidly, like they had much more control, and they were able to much more refine the mechanics behind that type of thing. Because it was an actual mask that Kevin Peter Hall had to wear. It was just remote controlled, which they perfect, in my opinion, in Alien versus Predator, first one. Because then after that, they just did a lot more CGI enhancing. But especially in Predators and obviously the Predator. Well, no, they do some really good animatronics in the Predator as well, but you don't see a whole lot of it. Anyway, so yeah, the effects are really good. The suitimation is very solid. Same with the Jungle Hunter. The suit is absolutely flawless and seamless. There's no zipper. There's no crease in the... Well, if there is a crease in the rubber, you could just say that's a crease in the skin. So, whatever. All the technology looks really good. The explosions are great. The gore effects are really, really good. The alien gore effects are really, really good. The sets are well made. The ship looks fantastic. The optical and invisibility effects, they're still a bit dated, and they're still kind of experimental, but they're similar with how the difference between the effects in, well, even though
Got him.
Yep, I got him. They're much more refined. They're still experimental, and they're still in their early stages. But like with what Trev was saying, you can tell that they're trying to show them off more. They're being a bit more confident in their appearance, and it does show, and it is effective. They are still a bit experimental, like I said, but they're much more refined, and they're more well done. And like the biggest thing that threw me off with the invisibility effects in the first movie was just how slow the movement was. Here, it's very crisp and clean. Not perfectly as it is in Alien versus Predator and then on, but it's as good as it can get with 1990s technology for this type of thing.
Well, it's also important to note that in the first two movies, anyway, it was a actual physical, like a big red suit or whatever color they needed.
Yeah, it was red. Yeah, you're right. It was red.
And then in the later movies, starting with AVP, it was actually just a CGI model that was the invisible one.
For better or for worse. But yeah, overall the effects are really, really solid. There's no flaws as far as I'm concerned. The closest thing is the invisibility effects, but they're better. They're a lot better. But yeah, there's no flaws. They're all really well done. You can tell that they used this movie's heightened budget very well. Let's see. Totally. Pro number 9 is the Yautja weapons expansion. Now, as I've stated before, okay, so not just in this case, but with my fictional characters that have a lot of weapons or attacks, like with Ultraman or Kamen Rider or just anything in fiction that has an arsenal of weapons, I like them to be large because, in my opinion, if a character has a very limited amount of toys to play with to kill things, I find that to be kind of stale because eventually it gets stale. Like with the first movie, all the Jungle Hunter has is the wrist blades and the plasma caster. They make it work in that film, but the kills do get kind of repetitive when everyone just gets blown to smithereens by a plasma caster. Or slashed, which only 2 people get slashed. Whereas here... Huh?
Variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, variety is the spice of life. So here, there's a much larger variety of how people get killed. One person gets impaled. Of course, you got to have the wrist blades. Some people get shot with plasma casters. But there's one dude who gets stapled to a wall with the net. One dude who gets the spear tip shot into his head. Couple dudes get impaled. Well, quite a few dudes get impaled with the combi stick. There's a much larger variety with the kills because of the added weapons, which to me is a big, is a very welcome addition because I like more weapons. I like a lot of weapons. And it also leads into pro number 10 is the Yautja lore expansion. It's kind of subtle and it's more established on in comics, but here they do about as much as they can do just by showing you a lot more of, the weapons and the ships and the big trophy room. You get to see a lot more insight to how these aliens act and how they live. They're just pretty much professional alien big game hunters. It's really fascinating and it's really interesting. And again, less is more. There's not a single word that's spoken, but they show you so much with all that you see with the predators in this film. It's really fascinating.
It is.
That's all I had to say for pros. You got any cons?
Well, I did at first, but as we were going along, I realized this is more of a nitpick, and actually based on watching an edited version of the movie. I did used to have issues with the pacing of the movie. I thought that, well, for one thing, and this is actually to its benefit now, in my opinion, it does move quicker than the first movie in some respects, but if you watch it edited, it is a little incoherent. So again, it depends on how you watch the movie. And I also, depending on my mood, I guess the final act, the final face-off between Harrigan and the Predator, or the City Hunter, it probably goes on a little bit long for some people. You think it might end at one point, but then it just keeps on going. But if you're jiving with it, you're actually happy that it doesn't just immediately end. So again, it's not really so much a con that I would hold against it now, but it was a nitpick that I used to have.
Anything else?
now that I think about it, when you were talking, we might want to try and just read a little bit of these bits of production info before we wrap up. Not too much of it, but some of these I didn't know about on Wikipedia. But anyway, yeah, go ahead and do your cons.
Well, hang on. Let's see. What did you want to talk about?
Like who Hopkins, Stephen Hopkins, originally wanted to have in the movie, and also Stan said something interesting about the design too. You want me to just go ahead and read little bits?
Sure.
So Hopkins originally wanted the lead role of Harrigan to be played by Patrick Swayze, and he was supposed to team up with Dutch, at least at one point in the movie. Steven Seagal was actually met for the role, but he had his own ideas for it, so that's why they didn't follow through with having him in the role. And Joel Silver, the producer, was one of the reasons why Gary Busey and Danny Glover, and apparently Steve Kahan, not sure who he was, but apparently he was also in Lethal Weapon. That's some of the reasons why they were brought over.
He was Captain Ed Murphy.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, okay, that's who he is.
Yeah, that's it. There we go. All right. Here we go. I messed that up. It's not Richard Donner's brother. It's his cousin. That's who it was. That's who the Steve Kahan was. And also, Stan said something really interesting about the design. Broad concept the same. The difference is this is a different individual of the same species. As in a snake is a snake, but different snakes are different. Their colorings are different. Different parts of their characteristics, their facial structures, subtle differences. So yeah, that influenced the design. Just some little tidbits that I didn't know about.
Alrighty, so
do you have any?
I don't have any cons. I have 3 nitpicks though.
Okay.
The Kaiju Network, you need to get off your ass and watch the Predator movies. Come on, boy. What the fuck?
Come on, guys. Just Alien and Predator. Those are musts. Come on.
Yes. I have 3 nitpicks. Number 1 is I do think the third act does run slightly out of steam. Because this also has to do with the fact that the fucking City Hunter, he keeps ditching his damn weapons. Which
He's
is
reckless. That's kind of a flaw. He's pretty reckless. He comes across very confident, and it bites him in the ass at the end. Really confident.
But with the third act kind of running out of steam, even when I was younger, the first 2 acts are so strong, but
it just keeps going, and you think it probably should stop at some point, you know?
It's kind of hard to describe because, I love the movie as a whole, and the ending is fantastic, but I just kind of wish that the fight, for one thing, I wish that the City Hunter didn't lose his arm. I kind of wish the fight between Danny and the City Hunter was a bit more physical, which is one thing. If Steven Seagal was cast, him being a martial arts expert, I've always wanted to see a fight between someone who is a highly trained martial artist take on a Yautja either barehanded or with some kind of blade. The closest thing we get to that is the samurai dude in Predators, but even that's very one-sided and kind of sloppily choreographed. But that's just like personal preference. It's not really a flaw, or it's not really a big strike against the movie. And also nitpick number 3 is the gang warfare is just kind of dropped after the subway scene, which that makes sense because the movie is focusing on Mike versus the City Hunter. The gang warfare is no longer involved. But it just kind of does feel like it was just dropped with no explanation.
Well, and the plot also moves away from it after King Willie gets killed. And I think that's because they're starting to realize there's a bigger threat than this gang war that we've been fighting for years. We need to kind of
True,
refocus
yeah,
and figure
and
out.
again, that makes sense too, but it just kind of feels a bit, I don't want to say lazy, but I guess that's the best way that you can describe it, is it does feel slightly lazy.
Well, you actually could say, to a certain degree, yeah, the third act and both dropping that plot and also just like it kind of does the running out of steam probably describes it the best, but not super bad. I mean, you still want to follow it through to the end, but it does start to lose momentum, maybe, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, it's not a huge issue, and I can, of course, I still love the movie all the same. But upon this most recent viewing, that's the biggest things that stuck out to me, and the closest thing that I can say are cons. But they don't ruin the film, and they don't bring the score down at all. So, final thoughts, Trev?
This is a highly underrated sci-fi action horror monster movie. It has, like Alien 3 to an extent, kind of developed a following, but it still kind of gets trashed on in some circles. But yeah, I still feel that as far as the Predator movies are concerned, including the AVPs, this and the first one are still at the top of the metaphorical pile, and it has a legacy. It did actually, to some degree, have more influence on how the franchise continued, more so than the first movie. So you have to credit it for that, especially the AVP thing. If they had planted the seed there and then the comics ran with it. Because really, if you think about it, I would say pairing the Predator with the Alien franchise allows you somewhere else to go. Because, you kind of rinse and repeat to an extent if you just stick with the Predator. Except for what they're going to try and do this next go around, which is a period piece with Native Americans.
Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, it was supposed to be a people weren't supposed to know about it. It was called Skulls, and people weren't supposed to know that it was a Predator movie, and somebody leaked it, and it was like, oh man, that would have been a neat surprise. But then people will probably know to go see it if they're a Predator fan. So. But no, anyway, yeah, that's going to start filming next month. The first Disney Predator movie.
Better be R-rated, you fuckers.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the 20th Century Studios label, so we'll probably be okay. But no, yeah, Predator 2 has an undeniable legacy that I think needs to be more appreciated, and I would probably give it a 8 out of 10 as a rating.
Well, I still love the shit out of this movie. It's one of my favorite films of all time. It's one of my favorite horror, sci-fi, action, monster movies of all time. And it's one of my favorite sequels of all time. I dig it so much that I'm just going to give it a perfect 10 out of 10 rating. Like I said before, there's things about it that balance out the slight, what's the word? Lacking parts in the first film, or in the first movie, balances out the lacking parts that I have with this one. And I think that Predator and Predator 2 are one of the biggest examples of a perfect double bill, along with RoboCop 1 and 2, Terminator 1 and 2, Alien and Aliens, and of course Predator and Predator 2.
Hey, let's throw in Tremors and Tremors 2 while we're at it.
Or Lethal Weapon and Lethal Weapon 2.
There you go.
So, yeah, I love this movie. It's one of my favorites, and I agree. It's highly underrated. It's miserably unappreciated. There's a lot of shit that this movie established that the franchise would later take advantage of, but still, it just kind of seems like people choose to ignore this one, which I think is a shame. So, yeah, look forward to tomorrow. Trev, you got anything to plug?
Oh, yes. I'm actually going to be a guest reviewer on Daikaiju Zilla's channel. He's going to review Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again here pretty soon, and I'm going to contribute to that. Also, I'm in the cards for Rodan, and that's as far as we've got thus far. But, yeah, that's what's coming up for me.
All righty. Look forward to tomorrow as Trev and I review, and in my opinion, another one of the most underrated, underappreciated installments in the technically both Alien and Predator franchise, but I consider the AVP movies to be more Predator films because they're
drive the narrative.
Yeah. With 2004's Alien versus Predator. Look forward to that. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. And as always, go out and have yourself a nice big game hunt in the middle of a giant Colombian Jamaican drug turf war. Rolls right off your tongue. If Yauchas have tongues. And I will see you guys in the next video.